Good evening. We'll start this year now. We'll start off with Tilim. Particularly, I'd like to mention Menachem Dov Chaim ben Chaya Gittel for Shlema, Sech Shor Chayil Yisrael. And then we'll give some stocha to discuss for Shlema. So that's Kapitel Chof. I'm not saying Mizmir David, Yan Chadin Ibiyim Tzara. Yes, I give Choshem Elohei Yaakov, Yishlach Ezra Chamekodesh, Mitzion Yisadeka, Yizka Kol Min Chesecha, Velos Chayadash Nasela, Yitan Lacha Chilav Alvecha, V'chol Atzosecha Yamale, Neranen Abishuasecha, V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgel, Yamale Adonai Kol Mishal Yisecha. Atu Yadati Ki Yeshia Adonai Mashiach Yahnehu Mishnei Kodshoy, Vigvoris Yesha Yaminoi, Ele Varechev, Ve'ele Vasusim, Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir, Heim Akaru Uvenafolo. Anachnu kamnu vanis oidod Adonai Hishia Hamelach Ya'anenu V'Yem Korenu. It's interesting. It just comes to mind in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. He talks about giving tzedakah by Vayavach David. He mentions that you should give tzedakah standing. I don't know what it means after over there, but okay. Right. So we're going to start today's shir, and because the Rebbe encouraged us during this time to learn about the Beis Hamikdash, so we've been learning about the Beis Hamikdash in Rambam, and here we have a picture which is meant to be of the Lishkas HaGozis. Lishkas HaGozis is a chamber which is on the north side of the Beis Hamikdash, or the Azara. And the way it's described in Gemara is Chetzre b'Kodesh, Chetzre b'Choil, and the Chelik, which the part which is in Choil, that's where the Sanhedrin would sit. That was the supreme Sanhedrin, and in order for them to be allowed to sit, it had to be a mokum of Choil, because Ein Yeshiva ba'Azara Elo leMalchei Beis David Bilvad. No one's allowed to sit in the Azara unless other than Malchei Beis David. Then they have the Chelik b'Kodesh, the outer part, the part which was closer to the Azara, that was Kodesh. And now here they've got where it says in the Mishnah, when the particular point after the first stage of the Avodah, there was a break in the schedule, and they would go to the Lishkas HaGozis and read the Shema. But the artist has drawn the Kohanim sitting for saying the Shema, which may be correct up in Kabbalah, because Shema has got to do with Elam Habriya. But how does this fit with the halacha that ein yeshiva ba'azara elo lemalchei beis David bilvad? So that no one else should be sitting there. Now you might think that the side chambers, which have got kedushas azara, don't have the isur to sit there, but the Rishonim don't learn that way, and we're going to see the Tosfos in a moment. And so therefore comes the question: if the Kohanim are not allowed to sit in the Azara, now never mind the Shema, they have a mitzvah to eat karbonos. Now this karbonos are divided into two groups, or Kodshe Kadoshim and Kadoshim Kalim. Kodshe Kadoshim Kalim may be eaten anywhere anywhere in Yerushalayim. Kodshe Kadoshim are only allowed to be eaten in the Azara, only Zichrei Kahuna, etc. And karbonos normally we know are meant to be eaten in a choshev way, in a respectable way. So here you're telling me that the Kohanim are not allowed to sit. And here the Kohanim have a mitzvah to eat the flesh of the karbonos. And by the way, I also don't know where it's discussed, where they roasted, where they cooked the karbonos. You have Lishkas HaNazirim and Lishkas HaMetzeroim, which were in the Ezras Noshim. That's for Kadoshim Kalim, but where did they cook the Kodoshim? I don't know. But meanwhile, let's take a look about this idea of Kohanim sitting in the Azara or in the adjacent rooms. So here, this is a Tosfos in Yuma Daf Chof Hei, where Tosfos addresses this, and it says, Ein Yeshiva ba'Azara, you're not allowed to sit in the Azara. And so then Tosfos asks this question: what happens about how do they eat? So first Tosfos says that possibly because the achil is tzorich avoda, because the eating is part of the needed for the avodah. Therefore, it may be done. They are allowed to sit whilst they're eating. Then Tosfos says another teretz, inami yeshloimar the hainu time the mutar leishiv alecha kodshim, because it says by the karbonis l'moshcha legdula that you are allowed, that they should be eaten in a respectable way. Therefore, so the first thing is because it's a mitzvah. The other one says it because it has to be in a privileged way, a choshev way. Then Tosfos towards the end says, don't give me the excuse that they're allowed to sit in the chambers which are adjacent, which are chambers which are adjacent, which are outside, but they are open to the Kodesh. That they've got the Kedushas Hazorah, that you're allowed to eat Kodesh Kadoshim there, but you are allowed to be seated there. So Tosfos says that he doesn't accept that. The whole b'shmaitin mashma. The leishiv nami havi ka'azoro atzmo of also leishiv, because the Gemara Yumo certainly gives us the impression that you're not allowed to sit even in the adjacent rooms because of Kedushas Hazorah. So Tosfos dismisses that. So I'm back to my question on the artist in this picture, with the fact that he depicted them reading the Shema seated. So according to Tosfos, that doesn't fit. Now, Rabbi Lu pointed out, and actually in Rabbi Paris also at Mincha pointed out to me that this is in today's Shir Rambam, because in the Shir of Gimel Prokim L'Yoim, in Perek Hey Halacha Vov in my print, it has here Hakoil Chayovim B'Birchas HaZimun. And he says, "Afilu koyanim she'ochlu kodshe kadoshim bo'azara." That even the koyanim who eat kodshe kadoshim bo'azara also have to make a zimun. So what's the chiddush? Why would you think not so? So Rabbi Paris mentioned that in some Mefarshim say that the svara is that perhaps because they had to stand, therefore you might have thought that doesn't follow as a proper zimun. He also referred me to in Rambam Masech Karbonis, Perik Yud in Mishnah Lamelech, Alocha Gimel, where the Mishnah Lamelech, he comments about sitting or standing when eating the Karbonis. And he gives a reference to a Tosfos, where Tosfos seems to hold that they would stand when eating the Karbonis. Anyway, so we have here Veniska, Venichia, Venire, the Koyanim especially will need to know whether they will be allowed to sit when they eat the Karbonis. The Rebbe once told Rabbi Tzin Shagal of Olav Shalom that he should teach his sons how to sing, because soon the Beis Mikdash will be built and they will have to, as Leviim, they'll have to sing. So we have to get ready for the Bias HaMoshiach, and Bez Hashem will see this Lamaisa, the Koyanim Bavidosim, including eating the Karbonis. Okay. I was last Shabbos, I was out of town, and there were two minyanim, 8 o'clock minyan and 9 o'clock minyan. And I davened in the 9 o'clock minyan. There was someone who was still from the 8 o'clock minyan. And just before Shemon Esrei, my phone rang. And it's very embarrassing that your phone rings in shul. It's wrong, and it's embarrassing. But this fellow made some kind of comment about Hashem taking the call or not taking the call. So I didn't respond anything at the time. After davening, we had a little bit of chit chat, and I saw he's a Yedei Sefer, a knowledgeable fellow, knows a lot of halacha. So I asked him, are you allowed to say Hashem's name in English in the context of a joke? So for him, it was a psashtil chiddush. He'd never heard about it. And I said, it's written in Shulchan Aruch, Magid Avraham, etc., brings that you're not meant to use Hashem's name even in the context of a joke. So sometimes people say, oh my God, or you something like that. That's Shaloi Halacha. You're not allowed to do that because you're using Hashem's name, even though it is in another language, not in the Lashon HaKodesh. that wouldn't be allowed. So let's read that inside. We have here from Simon Pei in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, where he talks about the Hashem's names, the 7 names, Kael, Elikim, Adni, etc. Even he says you're not allowed to mention here. It's in Hilchos Krishma. He's talking about in a place like in a bathhouse where you're not allowed to say a pasuk or a sacred thing. So he says Hashem's name even in a foreign language. Also, you're not allowed to say, and even so he says here the name which Hashem is known as in that language, as he says, Got in Loshen Ashkenaz, or Boga, Beloshen Poilin Verussia. So in those languages, when we say Got or Boga, we mean that's the translation of perhaps Adni or Elikim or Havai. That doesn't really matter. The point is that they do have Kedusha, and although he says in writing you are allowed to erase them, but to mention, to utter those names in a holy place is not allowed. And then he goes on to say, similarly, in the context of mentioning Hashem's name in vain, also, even if it's in a foreign language, not in Lashon HaKodesh, is also forbidden. I just want to digress for a moment. Here, the Alter Rebbe has said that you would be allowed to erase God. For example, he says it doesn't have Kedusha in the script. Uttering in a non-sacred place is not allowed, but to erase the script is allowed. The fact is, though, that there are poskim who are stricter about that, and we know that in all Haredish Sforim, and including perhaps led by the Sforim published by Merkez L'Inyan Chinuch, wherever there is not in a siddur, but if it's like a brochure, etc., when it has Hashem's name, G-O-D, we spelt with a G-D, and there's a reference to the Urim V'Tumim, I think in Siman Chof Hey, where he talks about that there is a Kedusha in Hashem's name, even in the written form, and therefore one doesn't write G-O-D in a text which will probably end up in a disrespectful place. So let's come back. So we've got here that one doesn't say Hashem's name, even in English or Russian, whatever it may be, other than in the context of prayer or acknowledgement to Hashem. So if a guy says to you, how are you doing? You say, thank God. That's, I think, perfectly legitimate, because you're using it in a form of, in a correct form. But to use it in just as an expression without really meaning an awareness of Hashem in that point is not okay. And I just want to show you that when they started singing by the Rebbe the Niggun of Niet Nikavo. So Niet Nikavo, we know there's nothing besides Hashem. Those are the words in Russian. So I'm going to read this Sikha. It's from, I think, Tovshin Chofei, possibly. Yeah, I think it'd be his Tammuz. And he says that Reb Michal Dvorkin, the Chassid Reb Michal Dvorkin, over several years had been working in a forest with Goyim, and therefore he had picked up several expressions in Sfas Hamid in Russian. And so he also was singing this song of Ein Oid Milvadoi. He was singing in Russian with Russian words. Niet nikavo, there is nothing. Nietu nikavo, kromi. Now, the Rebbe says here there should be Hashem's name. And now I'm going to take the liberty of saying, perhaps I shouldn't, but we're learning this entire. Kromi Boga Adnavo. That was the original Russian wording of the song. And the Rebbe says, but he didn't say it that way, because according to the Psak Din and Poskim, which the Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch, which we just read, one shouldn't mention Hashem's name, even not only in Hebrew, but even in another language. So therefore, the wording was changed to Krom Yivo. Krom Yivo means other than him, rather than saying other than God, to say Krom Yivo, other than him. So there is this sensitivity which from a Yidden have, that we don't refer to Hashem in conversation. We don't use the word God so much in conversation. We use the word Eibishter, Hashem, Bashefer, and all of this is out of a sensitivity not to be using Hashem's name, even in English or Yiddish, other than in the context of prayer or of praise of Hashem. Let's move on to the next point. Okay. So I was asked by a mashgiach in the hotel, is there an issue for if the pilot light has been lit by a Yid, may the Goyish chefs now continue working by turning on the fire from the pilot light? So what we have here, this is in the dinim of Bishul Akum. So we have here about the lighting of the oven. And now there's a difference between bread, the halacha is to make bread pas Yisrael, and making food bishul Yisrael. Bishul Yisrael is a little bit stricter. And here there's a difference between the Asfardim and Ashkenazim. Let's go straight to the Minhag Ashkenazim. Yesh Cholkim, the Machaber does not allow Shgiras, he doesn't allow just the lighting of a fire or throwing a piece of wood into the fire for Bishul Akum, only for pas. But Yesh Cholkim Svira Lahu, the Hadlokas Aish, Oichita Begecholim. But that if a Yid lights the fire or if a Yid stokes the embers, that's enough to make it Bishul Yisrael, just like it is enough to make it a Pas Yisrael. So here's one area where the Minhag HaSfardim, the Bishul Yisrael, according to Sfardim, is stricter than Bishul Yisrael, according to Ashkenazim. Then, towards the end, the Rama says, V'yesh oimrim, afilu lechita Yisrael, even if he didn't tamper with the fire at all. Rak shehagoyo hidliko ho'esh me'eshel Yisrael. That the last opinion says that even if a Yid lit a first fire, and then the Goy lights the fire from there, that's also called Bishul Yisrael. So there's a home here in this area where they have a kitchen with Goyish staff. They have a yortzeit candle. The mashgiach lights the yortzeit candle, and if in the middle of the day, one of the Goyish staff needs to cook some food, so they will know that they will light the fire. They'll take a match and light it from this yortzeit candle, and then with this they will light the stove. So that's how they rely for Bishul Yisrael. So what we're seeing here is that it's a yesh oimrim. So possibly there's room to be machmir, that there should be dafka Yid lighting the actual fire, not eish me eish. But the bottom line is that there is a heter that if with a pilot light lit by a Yid, so then it would be called Bishul Yisrael. But of course, there's room for higher standards than that, not to rely on that Yesh Oimrim. Okay. Let's move on. Now here I'm going to do something which I don't usually do, and that is to confess that I made a wrong psak. And I got a call from a school, and there was a group of class which had been making biscuits, and they had a non-Jewish teacher, and the non-Jewish teacher switched on the oven and put the first batch of biscuits into the oven. Now, then the question was raised: is this called Pas Yisrael? Because the children had shaped the biscuits, but the lighting of the fire and putting the biscuits into the fire was done by a goy. So in my mind, I had something that if a Yid had made the shape of the loaves is enough to say it's called Pas Yisrael, which I was mistaken on that. And so I'm going to read from the Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Kuf Yud Beis. The fact who made the dough and who shaped the loaves, that doesn't count. If it was baked by a Yid, even if the goy made the dough, that would be okay. But if it's the other way around, if a Yid had shaped the loaves and a goy had baked it, that would not be okay. It's clear that the fact that the children had shaped the biscuits was not enough of a heter to permit this. Now, what happens? There are heterim for pas palter. But then there's the Shulchan Aruch is stricter when it comes to a goy baking a Jew's bread. And that's interesting. To buy the goy's bread, which as he's a baker, there's a heter. But goy to bake a Jew's bread, they say it's stricter. But they say that's because of like bishul akum. Just like if a goy cooked food for you, you have what problem with bishul akum. So if a goy baked your bread, it would be also under the din of bishul akum. So I was just thinking perhaps there's a shtickles heter on that basis by saying that the biscuits are not oila shulchan malachim. You don't have biscuits for a meal, and therefore possibly it wouldn't come under the issue of bishul akum. So, but perhaps you could rely on that. But okay. But for the future, I will have to remember this. Moshe would often say, "Ein adam oimed al halacha ela im kein nichshel ba." You make a mistake, and this way you'll remember for the next time. Right. Let's move on. Okay. Right. When we serve food on Shabbos, we are normally we're accustomed that we take the pot off the fire.
Biscuits as in a cookie, not biscuits as in the shape. Because in America, it's different.
Told to make a difference between the word biscuit and we mean what the Americans called cookies. Otherwise, it might be misunderstood. Okay, let's move on. So normally we take the pot off the fire when we're going to serve food on Shabbos. And the reason is because stirring food is part of the cooking process, and that's called megis. Now, then, what about if it's totally cooked? So then it's not really cooking in any case, but it's fully cooked in any case. But it's perhaps nira kemavashel. So let's read this halacha inside. A pot has been taken, it's boiling hot, it's been taken off the fire. And if it's not fully cooked, you mustn't ladle out any food. Because if the food is not fully cooked and you're taking a ladle, so you are stirring, although your intention is to ladle some of the food out, but you are effectively you're stirring. And that's going to be an issue of cooking, as discussed earlier. But if the food has been fully cooked, you are allowed to stir it only once it's taken off the fire. We see that whilst it's on the fire, you wouldn't be allowed to stir it. Let's then go in the middle. I've taken out a piece which talks about when it's dye, coloring fabrics. There are those who are more machmir, that even if the pot is off the fire, one shouldn't stir it. To take out with a ladle, but to ladle out, and the pot is removed from the fire, then that's okay, and there's no problem of megis there. So we know that. The question which we have in our case here is, it's a hotel, and there's a goyish chef, and he is taking the food out of the pot. Does the goy have to take the food off the fire before serving the soup? Or can he serve soup whilst it's still on the fire? Again, the soup is fully cooked. Even if I would stir it myself, I would be maximum being in violation of maras ayin. If it was not cooked and I'm ladling out, then I would be cooking, even though it's not my intention, but would say psikresh, etc. Generally, with the goy, we take a position that we don't worry about psikresh. If I tell the goy to do A, I tell the goy to open the fridge, and the light is going to go on, that's not a worry. It's not my worry. So I feel that the same would apply, that the goyish chef is allowed to ladle out the soup whilst the soup is still on the fire. I'm going to declare my bias here because I davened late, by the time I came to get the soup was cold. wasn't freezing cold, but it wasn't, and I think that it really would be okay to have left it on the fire, because it's the goy who's doing the serving, and I don't think we have to worry about all of these chumras of not ladling out if a goy is doing the actual act. Let's move on. Someone asked me a question. For example, he's selling schach. And now schach comes in packages also. These schach lonetzach, whatever they call them, canas. How about if you have a posuk, or a couple of words from a posuk about the schach, and it's on the packet of the schach? Or if you're selling grapes and you have a posuk, yochlu anovim v'yisbo. I know it's wrong spelling, but fine. So is there an issue of having words from a posuk on a package? So here we have a halacha in Hilchos actually. In the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, where it says, Oyson anoshim shechokekin posuk basukes teshvu al hadalas v'soilin basuka lenoi. Those people who take a marrow and they carve out from the marrow, they carve out the words of basukes teshvu, and they put it up to decorate the sukkah. So if you think Halloween is the marker of taking a marrow and making shapes and making a message on it, looks like it was the were Yidden who were doing that. I don't know who took it from whom. Kolponim, it says we shouldn't use marrows to put up psukim in the sukkah. The fisha also lichtov psukim min haTorah ela imken yesh behem sefer sholem. One wouldn't be allowed to write a pasuk on its own. It'd have to be a whole sefer, as discussed in Yeridei Reish Pei Gimel. And carving is the same as writing. So here we have a problem of writing a pasuk on a marrow to decorate the sukkah. The Alter Rebbe refers to Yeridei Reish Pei Gimel. So here we have from in Reish Pei Gimel, it says here, if you have a scroll with three, he says also lirkaim psukim betalis. You wouldn't be allowed to embroider psukim on a talis, and we're not talking about Hashem's name. Just the psukim. And what does he say further? Also, now here this is in the talis, I believe, in the shach. Also, mipneishu maybe psuki toira lidei zilzu. What's going to happen is that this pasuk will be exposed to a disgrace, because the tzitzis of the talus are only tashmisha mitzvah. People very often ask, what should I do with an old talus? Really, menadin, an old talus, once it's out of commission, you are allowed to wrap it up and put it in the bin, and you're allowed to go to the talus in the Beis HaKisei. He says, we don't, the one which we for davening. At any rate, so then you leave the pasuk on the talus may be exposed to disgrace, and the pasuk will be disgraced. So this is not talking about shemitz. So we have here a problem of writing a pasuk in a place where it's going to be exposed to disgrace. So I told the one who asked me this question about putting a pasuk on the packaging, if he would somehow, let's say, take one of the letters, let's say the letter Hey, and the letter Hey would be broken, that in the vertical and the horizontal piece where they can meet, there should be a slight gap, and that way it doesn't have it's not a proper writing. If you look carefully in the Shaila Moira print, or for that matter in the Dvar Malchus, the Chumash in the Dvar Malchus, so that's what they're using a text where the Hey for Hashem's name is always a broken Hey. Now someone's asking about an opshernish where they added a psukim to the cake. I think you actually mean by a reinfernish to cheder, and there the whole word is that the children eat the pasuk. And it's that actually the pasuk which is written is a pasuk, I think, in Yeshaya, which talks about taking it into yourself. Yeah, so someone's asking about psukim on invitations in Echanami. One should be careful not to use psukim on invitations. And I think I mentioned before, I've got a whole sefer all about Shemus called Ginzei Kodesh, and it's got about 5 pages of all different announcements where you'd want to use a pasuk and how to modify them slightly So like instead of Baruch haba, you can make Bruchim haboim. Yeah, Baruch haba b'shem Hashem is a pasuk. Yeah, in Hallel. If you write Bruchim haboim b'shem Hashem, so it's not a pasuk. So you can do those kind of modifications to avoid this problem. Okay, let's move on. Oh, I don't know what happened over here. Okay, I got a question. One of our regular listeners, he listens to the recording. His name is Rebbe Tal Bassman, Talmud Chochem, who lives in Pittsburgh, and his mother passed away last week. So offer him our condolences. But meanwhile, he asked me the question. It's very common that people at a levaya, etc., will give an embrace, a hug to one another. It's a form of expression. I don't know, pre-COVID, post-COVID, but okay. So he asked, is that a union of shalom? Because an oval is not allowed to, we don't give shalom to an oval, and oval shouldn't be saying shalom to others, especially during Shiva. Is embracing, that kind of embrace, does that come into the gather of shalom? So I was in Bournemouth and I met, there's a Rav, he's known as Rav Chido Weiss, he's a Rav in Antwerp, and I visited him he on Friday. He's very gracious, and I asked him this question, and afterwards on Sunday and Monday he sent me what you have on the screen, and he gives me a reference to a Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, where it talks about an oval, Rahman al-Islam, should not be holding a child on his lap. And therefore, if that's an issue, perhaps embracing would be certainly in the same category. But on the other hand, with a child, it's more of an entertainment and a distraction. And then it says that in Ramo about a man shouldn't embrace his wife in the state of Avelis, which seems to say, therefore, that other embracing would be okay. So he was inclined to say it is okay. And I just want to go on and give you another source. I'll show you afterwards. I looked around, and this is from the Ritva in Moed Cotton, I believe. Yeah, it's the Ritva who says that, what about nodding? You know, we often make a nod as an acknowledgement. So that's also a form of greeting. But actually it says when one goes to B'Menachem Oval, and one shouldn't overstay your welcome. And when the oval nods with his head, that is some should be seen as an indication that, you know, enough, and, you know, give me my space. So it has here, this is the Lashon of the Brisa, oval. Kivin sheni ana beroishoi, shuv ein menachamim rashoim leishiv etzloi. Once the oval has done this nod, it's, well, the people who are coming there to console and to comfort, they shouldn't continue. They should take the the remes and go out. And so he quotes here Yitzchak ben Gayut, who says that the oval has an issue of nesinas shalom. The oval may bow to acknowledge people during the Shiva, as people do when they greet someone, because he's not actually uttering words of greeting. You can discuss this, you can challenge this, but what I'm seeing from the Ritva, he's saying that shalom is only actually using the word shalom, but other gestures, which although they are also gestures of greeting, but they don't come into the Issa of Nesinas Shalom. So we have here a word from the Ritva to support the psak of Rav Chido Weiss. Okay, let's move on then. Someone asked me the following. He puts money in the pushka, and so now he's asking, can he exchange it with a voucher? For those who are in other parts of the world, the vouchers here are like in every civilized society to nowadays, you have, the government has incentives for charity, and you have a certain tax return if you give a certain amount of charity. So then the government will match and will give you back the tax on the money which you give to charity, something on those lines. So I can if I give cash, it costs me £10. Costs me £10. If I give a voucher, so I can give £7, and the charity will be able to get from the government £3. So it costs me £7 to give £10. That's his question. So can I I've got money in the pushka, and then I take out £10. So if I take out wait a minute, how does that work? I take out money from the pushka, and I take out £10, and I put in the £10 voucher. But that £10 voucher only cost me £7. So is that considered? Is that correct? Is that acceptable? That's what I believe with the question. So I'd just like to say the following. Let's say I earn £10,000. I earn £10,000, of which the government takes £3,000. So I earn net £7,000. So my liability for Meiser is £700. If I, let's say, write out a check of £500, so then there will be a tax return of, help me, about £150, let's say, yeah, whatever it may be. So effectively, I can fulfill, if I have a Meiser liability of £700, if I write out a check, a gift aid check of £600, and then due to the tax return, the tzedakah has received £700, I have fulfilled my Meiser liability. What I'm trying to say is that the money which you manage to retrieve from the tax office, that is considered your money, and you are able to fulfill your mitzvah of tzedakah and of Meiser by that tax claim. So it becomes a little bit, the fine print. So let's say if I gave this check of £600, so then and I get a tax return of, let's say, £200 on that. So then I've earned a little bit more. I thought that before I earned £7,000. I've actually earned £7,200. In other words, I'm saying the tax claim can also be added to your earnings, so to speak. But you can use your tax claim to cover your Meiser liability. And therefore, coming back to the question which was asked, is there a problem of putting a charity voucher for the same amount as cash? So if it's in your own home, I don't see this as a problem. If it's in shul, then it's a different story, because we know, certainly those people who are into dealing with stockers, dealing with vouchers is obviously tedious, and it takes time. So for someone to come into a shul pushka and put in a £10 voucher and take out £10 in cash, that is, you're actually causing extra tircha to the Gabed stocker, which I don't think is justified. And I know that the late Rabbi Sion Haknal Lashon took extreme exception to people doing that, because it's just giving them extra tircha. I still think that if it's in your own home, you're still in full control of that, but I might be wrong in that. Okay, let's go on to a very practical question. And I make a joke about the minhagim. Is it kapota day or not a kapota day? But this is actually a halacha shaila. Someone asked me for this motzei Shabbos. Hafich l'simcha, if chas v'shalom we're stuck in Golas. So do you, and it's going to go to shul. Many minyanim will, and shul, including our shul, will have a minyan 15 minutes, let's say, after motzei Shabbos. So people should be able to come to shul after Shabbos with a car and with wearing already their plimsolls, kapota, or regular weekday clothes. So it's a good question, and generally there's a question every motzei Shabbos: how soon? When do you switch to Big Day Choil? Is it? And so you can look in Sefer Michikre Minhagim of Rabbi Gorari, volume base, Chelik Sheni. He's got a whole discussion about that. And he had an uncle who was a Ziditschover Rebbe, who once came to the Rebbe's Farbrengen in Motzei Shabbos, and he wasn't wearing his shtreimel. The Rebbe commented that Motzei Shabbos should also be wearing Bigdei Shabbos. And we all know all the beautiful pictures of the in the Jewish newspapers of Olav Malkus, and they're all, the beauty of it is that all the Eden, all the Rabbonim wearing their shtreimels. So the Minig Yisrael at large seems to be that you would wear your Bigdei Shabbos on Motzei Shabbos. Of course, now we have the particular question about our story about when it goes into Tisha B'Av. So in Nite Gavriel, he talks about wearing Bigdei Chayil. He says it's okay to also wear Bigdei Shabbos if you continue from Shabbos. And he writes that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that's Nite Gavriel is our Gracie Yedid, and he was mavar that the Rebbe in such a kaviyas did wear Bigdei Shabbos, followed by Echo. The Rebbe wore Bigdei Shabbos. If you read the Sikha, which was published for this week, from Tafshin Lamed Daled, the Rebbe talks about the Meile of a Shabbos Chazoin, and the Meile of Shabbos Chazoin, the Meister mit Barditchever, mit the Shonis Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, the Meile which goes straight in Tisha B'Av, you're going Tisha B'Av, the Yehofech L'Simcha is coming from Shabbos straight into the fast. So this idea more, certainly al derech HaChasidus, to want to not create a divide between Shabbos and the fast. Now, having said that, on the other hand, on Motzei, once it's already Motzei Shabbos, and you said Baruch HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chel, you're not allowed to put on Bigdei Shabbos. You're not allowed to put on Bigdei Shabbos the whole of the 9 days. You certainly wouldn't be allowed to put on Bigdei Shabbos on Motzei Shabbos. So all I can say is, if someone comes into shul wearing his jacket, so the teretz is poshut because he already said Baruch HaMavdil, and then he can't put on Bigdei Shabbos. But those who come with the kapotas, that's because before they said Baruch HaMavdil Kodesh L'Chel, they were still wearing their kapotas, or they put on the kapotas before saying Baruch HaMavdil, and then they continued wearing it into Motzei Shabbos. Someone is pointing out about the vouchers story. The shul would have to pay to the voucher company a fee as well. So the voucher isn't actually worth the face value of the voucher. I mean, if that's the case, you're absolutely right. Then if the case is that the tzedakah does not get the face value of the voucher, then even in your own pushka, you wouldn't be allowed to take out a £5 note and put in a £5 voucher, because you are cheating the tzedakah of a few pence, whatever the commission is. I didn't know that that's the case, but if that's the case, you're absolutely right. Right. Finally, one of our listeners, again, this is one who listens to the recordings, is actually in Sydney, in Australia, and he has the following question. He is an assistant rabbi in a shul, and they daven Ma'ariv early on Friday nights. He's got a couple of bar mitzvah boys, and they prefer to go to a local shul where they daven Kabbalah, daven Ma'ariv Bismano. So are his boys chayav to be Mekabel Shabbos because Tati is Mekabel Shabbos early, and the same thing as his wife bound to Mekabel Shabbos. Now the answer to both of these is that this idea that because the Rosh Habayis, the Gdol Habayis, is Mekabel Shabbos, therefore it's incumbent upon the dependents also to be Mekabel Shabbos, is not very well documented. There is a Pri Megadim who suggests it. The Alter Rebbe doesn't mention a word about this, so it's not that well documented. Okay, but Pri Megadim is a. There's another very important point here. That there's a tshuva of Moshe Feinstein, Yigis Moshe, and he says the following: that a woman should be Mekabel Shabbos when her husband is Mekabel Shabbos, if he's doing it l'shem mitzvah. But if he's Mekabel Shabbos early because he wants to eat supper early, so then she's not mechuyev noch zu tanzen. She's not bound by his preference to eat early. If he's Mekabel Shabbos out of respect for Shabbos, then she should follow suit. So other poskim disagree with that. Rav Vosner and Shevet Halevi disagrees with that, and he says a woman is bound to be Mikal Shabbos, even if it's just because the husband wants to eat early. So again, it's not so clear. What I would say is, and this I saw in the Piskei Teshuvos, he says so also, that in any event, if the wife is not Mikal Shabbos early, but definitely by the time the husband comes home from shul, she should have been Mekabel Shabbos. It's certainly inappropriate that he would come to home from shul and this one's in the shower and this one hasn't lit. That's not appropriate. It should be that when he comes home from shul, by then the candles should be lit and the family have been Mekabel Shabbos. Someone's put on the chat asking if we have time to advise if someone's not fasting, should they make Havdalah? And what do you do about wine? So there are poskim. This is debated in contemporary poskim. Some say just like you have a heter to break your fast, you have a heter to eat without Havdalah. I don't think one has to go that way. You could make Havdalah, and bear in mind also that the Polish poskim are very cagey about women making Havdalah. That's possibly why they're saying let them eat without Havdalah. We're not so. Alter Rebbe doesn't have such a problem. So make Havdalah on a cup of coffee, make Havdalah on a cup of tea, which is Chamar Medina. I think one should make Havdalah. By using coffee or tea, it avoids the question of having wine. One last thing which I want to share with you, and that is that last week, I think, we had the discussion about the Shabbos boat. Sorry, the boat Chabad, where there's a flush system, which sometimes will activate a macerator, which works with electricity. And I'd mentioned about Sophic Psikresha being an Issa Rabbanon. So that wasn't really correct. The correct term, which I should have used, was that a Sophic Psikresha for an Issa Rabbanon would be acceptable. One of the pioneers in halacha and technology is the late Rav Levi Yitzchak Halperin. And I think I once had a conversation with him or one of his staff about an alarm where there's a sensor and you pass by and you're activating, and he was advising to set this sensor on a timer. So then if you pass the sensor, it's not sure whether the sensor is on or not. That would be categorized as a Sophic Psikresha. You don't know what the circumstances are. Is there a Psikresha happening or not? It depends. It's beyond your control. So, but and that's really one of his key psukim, his key solutions for halacha problems of this nature, was to use a timer to create a Sophic Psikresha. But that's because we're looking at electricity, which is a Isser D'Rabbanon. Therefore, it's a Sophic Psikresha by Isser D'Rabbanon. And therefore, that I would think would also apply in our instance, with the macerator. You can also use this concept of Sophic Psikresha by Isser D'Rabbanon. If it were a Sophic Psikresha by Isser Min HaTorah, then one wouldn't be allowed to. The Alter Rebbe says it's a Sophic Deraisa. So there, the story is about closing a lid, and you might be trapping animal or inside the container. That could be a Isser Deraisa. So Sophic Psikresha there, one would have to be machmir. Sophic Psikresha of an Isser D'Rabbanon, one can be more lenient. So the one who raised this point with me said, if that's the case, then, and this I've actually seen in some of the contemporary poskim, once you're saying that using this macerator is Isser D'Rabbanon, then we have Bichlal for Kovod Habrius. One can be makel to do an Isser D'Rabbanon, taking the stones, etc., which are mentioned in Simashin Yud Beis. For Kovod Habrius, one would be permitted to do an Isser D'Rabbanon, which is a valid point. But certainly, if it's a Sophic, it makes it more comfortable to be more lenient about this. Okay, I'm going to stop here a couple of minutes early. I would like to go to the Siyum, which is taking place in the Yeshiva Gdola Siyum, which is taking place in Golders Green. So I wish you all a good Shabbos and Yehoffach L'Simcha, and we should have the Simchas Olam Al Rishon, Mashiach Tzidkenu, Meher V'Yameinu Mamash.
Charles.
May Yashakoya.
Shkoyach. Shkoyach.